and welcome to Crescent Podcast. I'm your host, Lucy Jessie, and I run Crescent Digital Marketing, where I work with neurodivergent-led businesses to help them create engaging and authentic online content. A quick shout out to our amazing sponsor, Purple Frog Signs. They're based down in Gillingham. If you want to check them out for any of your signage needs, their website is purplefrogsigns.com. They're also on Instagram and LinkedIn, so please go and give them a follow. Today we're joined by Dr. Jane CoomberSewell, who might sound a bit familiar because we had her lovely wife Joyce on the podcast recently. So now we get to see the other side of that today. How are you, Jane?
Really good, Lucy. You.
I am very good, thank you. So why don't we start a bit about your background and how that's led on to what you do now?
Okay, so I have an awful lot of initials after my name, which is a bit of an roundabout story. So I did a bachelor's, as most of us did in the early 90s. And what do you do when you're not sure what you want to do with your life? You bibble around for a bit and then you join the civil service. So I did 10 years in Job Centre Plus. Please don't shoot me. I'm sorry. Well, do you know what? The biggest compliment I ever got as a civil servant was when I did 5 years as a disability employment advisor. I would like to apologise to every single client because back in those days, I only had intellectual knowledge, no lived experience, and I was an idiot. And I said lots of very insufferable things. But one thing that lots of clients often said to me was, "You're not a typical civil servant, are you? You actually give a damn." And I think that's true. It's slightly unfair on civil servants because lots and lots of people in the civil service do give a damn. It's just a very command and control environment where you can give a damn as much as you like, but if it doesn't fit, I always used to say the civil service was one size fits nobody, then that's kind of where you get stuck. But anyway, they paid for me to do my master's, which was fantastic. I did 2 years part-time at York, finishing at Ilford Job Centre at 2:00 on a Tuesday, jumping on a train, running up to York, sleep at beautiful halls of residence at York, day of lectures, finish at 4, 4:30 train, back in Ilford for 9, home and in bed just after 10, back at my desk, 8:00 Thursday morning, which was a super crazy way to do a master's and also a super crazy subject area for me because, of course, when the civil service are paying, you do the subjects that they say you can do. So I did public services management, which is fine. I managed to skew it round to my interests because I always do. But my first degree is English and History and my PhD is Media and Cultural Studies. And my next PhD, which I'm working on at the moment, is in History. Well, what else do you do, Lucy, when you direct one business, a co-director of another business, at least on paper a full-time carer? What else would you do with your spare time? That and learn more too.
Another PhD, like just why not?
It's my happy place. Learning is my happy place.
I do love that. You describe yourself as a word nerd.
Yes.
Can you explain that for us?
Well, my business coach really doesn't like me referring to myself as a word nerd. So we're experimenting with word enabler.
I like word nerd. I don't see what's wrong with that.
Do you know what? For a while on LinkedIn, my handle was Dr. Word Nerd. I think it's now Dr. Research Goddess, which sounds rather posy. I might have to change that. But research is my love. So I actually stumbles for words. Anything to do with words is what I try and earn my living at. So primarily proofreading, ghostwriting. And that's what I mean by word enabling. Sometimes people will give me a proofread. They've got a fantastic idea for a business book or a story. And they just, perhaps there's one aspect they're not very good at. It could be that they can't write dialogue. So I will jump in and I'll say, rather than pay me to proofread that, and I know it's not going to get very far with a publisher, let me work with you and either help you write your dialogue, learn how to write dialogue, or I can write your dialogue for you. It's particularly when there's dialect and accents. I am absolutely fascinated by regional slang. One of my favourite things when I did my first degree in Liverpool is that I learned that an alley is not an alley. In Liverpool, in different parts of Yorkshire, it could either be a ginnel or a snicket or a 10-foot, depending on how wide it is and its purpose.
Okay.
So I pick up lots of, I can swear fluently in 8 languages.
Such a gift. I love that. Such a good talent to have.
And I'm currently learning to speak Maltese because, again, what else do you do with all the spare time? It is relevant to my PhD studies. Yeah, basically anything to do with words. I also teach academics how to speak at conferences because have you ever been to an academic conference? The very, very first one I spoke at was, again, back at Liverpool where I did my first degree. And I'm not going to mention any names because, to protect the guilty. The guy who was the keynote speaker was like probably the last old man crush I had before I realised, before I admitted to being fully gay. And he was this sexy lecturer, and he was the keynote speaker at this conference. So like when I'd been 21, he'd been like this rock god in the literary world. And I was so excited. And he came in. Well, first of all, the keynote speaker was first, which is really weird. And he sat down, he put on his glasses, he put a stack of papers about yay thick on the desk, and he read them like that for fully 40 minutes. And my heart sank. That afternoon, presented with two other people, so it was normally a panel of three. My subject was Joyce Grenfell, who was an entertainer. One of the other ones was on Terry Pratchett, and I can't remember what the third one was, but something to do with comedy and satire. As we all finished, the chair of the panel stood up and went, "Thank God, panel on entertainment that was actually entertaining." And that's when I knew I needed to teach academics how to present.
Yeah, it's all very good having the knowledge, but being able to actually present that in a way that's accessible and engaging.
The academic world is in crisis, and they don't like people like me saying that, but they need to admit it and get over it, because otherwise universities are going to implode. And one of the biggest tricks academics miss is every time you present at a conference, every time you have lunch at an event, as we know in the business world, that is not the place to be a wilting wallflower. That is the place to engage, to people by people, funders by people, just as much as Joe Bloggs buying a tin of beans from the corner shop rather than from Tesco. If you are not engaging from the stage, you are not engaging that potential funder, that potential collaborator, that potential new job at another university. And I just think it's something that there's going to be a major crisis. They're still spending money as if we're all on grants when we're on loans. It's all very, very weird, and they need to get their act together. Rant over.
I don't know how to follow that now. So you mentioned proofreading and ghostwriting, things like that. I think a lot of people tend to, particularly with proofreading and copy editing, they kind of use the terms interchangeably, but they're actually quite different. Can you explain that for us?
Do you know what? Even as a proofreader, I didn't fully understand the difference for quite a while. And it's one of those things that I still have to kind of have notes up to think about when people are asking me, am I proofreading, am I copy editing? So I'm doing that right now, getting my notes up. So, they're both about word checking and both about making your words clear. Technically, the terms go back to the whole concept of galley proofs and editing copy, which is why in some respects the differences in terms of how we deliver the service, a lot of them have disappeared because it's all electronic largely now. I would say that copy editing I don't copy edit academic stuff because that would be unethical, because copy editing allows a certain amount of rewriting for clarity. And it's really clear particularly on the PhD level and the examinable level, that would be unethical. If somebody is not clear, they need guidance, they perhaps need a supervisor, intervention from their supervisors, but that's not the role of the editing process. And as such, if somebody asked me to copy edit their PhD, the answer would be, no, I'm sorry, I'll proofread it for you. You can engage me to help you prepare for your Viva, which some universities allow, some don't, in terms of what questions might come up, how to communicate in the exam. But I'm only doing proofreading, which is spelling, grammar, sense, consistency of style, not of language. Copy editing would be a lot more about, let's say somebody's written an article for a magazine. If there's a flaw in their argument, you might point out the flaw, or you might help them write their way round the flaw. When people approach me to proofread or copy edit journal articles, occasionally they'll say to me, it's a third too long. Can you cut out a third? Well, again, that's much more like a copy edit than a proofread, at which point my answer will be yes, if you give me editing credit.
Yes.
Because that's then not ethical. They're acknowledging they've needed help with that step. But to say that that's all their own work when it hasn't fit the criteria, then yes. But copy editing and proofreading, in terms of when clients contact me for business work or for books, it tends to be, they will always use the term proofreading. And then I will say to them, okay, what is it you really want? Sometimes I don't even correct the term because I don't really see the point. It's kind of not really the point. But then we price according to whether it's a a proofread, a developmental edit, a copy edit, whatever. And yes, I have worked for one of those essay mills, but I dumped it very quickly when I realised what I was doing.
Fair enough.
I think most of us rather naively do that for a while when we first get our proofreading qualifications, especially if we come from an academic background.
Yeah. One thing that you haven't mentioned, despite all the letters that you have after your name, is that you're actually a member of MENSA.
Yes, I am wearing
What?
my Mensa t-shirt.
Lovely. So what does that mean to you?
Okay, so you very much concentrate on neurodiversity. And as you know, I have a big interest in neurodiversity. And I would say that I am abstractly neurodiverse, or I have been guilty of using those phrases, neurodiverse light, spicy. I think spicy's got a lot more to do with my attitude than my neuro. But so this is going to be a little bit controversial.
Okay.
Hey, whatever. So the whole Mensa thing sort of started as a little bit of an accident. I've always known that I'm different. I just assumed it was because I'm going to swear now.
That's fine. You can swear.
Because I was a twin. In my world, being a twin is a swear word.
Okay.
And to be fair, I think my sister feels the same way. I am the youngest by 6 minutes, and it is interesting, an interesting dynamic. Let's just leave it like that. Okay, so about, I don't know, just before COVID, there was a grandchild living in this house who thought they were cleverer than me and absolutely became obsessed with the idea that they were going to join Mensa.
Okay. How old were they?
They were at the time in their early 20s. And they were going to use this to beat Joyce and me and be basically rule the roost. So me being me, I always encourage people to find out about themselves because it's something I'm very curious about myself. So the three of us went off to sit the Mensa test in Maidstone. And none of us got the pass mark. Not any of us. But suffice it to say, I came closest of the three of us. Now, there is a myth about Mensa that you can only take the test once in your lifetime. This is not true. You can take the test as many times as you like. You cannot revise for it, but you can prepare for it. And I am going to completely acknowledge that Mensa measures IQ, intelligence quotient, and that is only one way of measuring one type of intelligence. So anyway, things moved on. And of course, when you consider that Joyce's level of dyslexia and that her processing, she will acknowledge, is quite slow, the fact that she came in the top 15% was quite impressive. To be fair to young grandchild, or not so young grandchild, there was another person in the room who was extremely badly behaved and distracting, and it was a very hot room, and said grandchild ended up virtually having a bit of an autistic meltdown, also on the spectrum. I'm the only person in this house who doesn't have an official diagnosis. So you have to wait a year and a day. So then COVID happened, and I took myself off to London, the very, very first Mensa test in central London after they started being allowed to do the tests again. And I had a lovely day. I had lunch with a friend, and I took the test again because I'd missed it by two points with distractions in the room. So to join Mensa, your IQ under these two tests, in one of these two tests, has to be in the top 2% of, Joyce would always say the world. It's not the world, it's your region. So for us, Northern Europe. So I would absolutely walk a Mensa test in America or Canada. I would never get into Mensa in China or Japan.
Okay.
Because it's regionally adjusted.
Yeah.
And I'm not in the top 2%, I'm in the top 1%. Now, that is how I came to join Mensa. It is not how I came to classify myself as abstractly neurodiverse. That's been a different journey, but it started there.
Okay.
So, as you know, Joyce and I have spent a lot of time working with neurodiverse students. And on several occasions, Joyce and I have, I think, lovingly cared for students who've suddenly come to the realization that they are not broken, they are not less than, they are not damaged by anything other than the fact that society treats them as broken, less than, and other than. And they have had emotional breakdowns, and we have put them back together again. I remember one student absolutely not allowed to touch students, especially if they're neurodiverse, but when they are sobbing in your arms, they have thrown themselves into your arms for 40 minutes because they have suddenly realised that at the age of 3, their parents told them they were autistic and therefore broken, and have been reinforcing that ever since. And they're now in their early 20s. There's not a lot else you can do other than comfort them and keep saying to them, you are not broken. You are not less than. You are not other. And about 3 weeks after I got my MENSA test results and joined MENSA, which was really was it about elitism? Maybe just a smidge, because it is nice to actually be the best at something, because I'm not the best at sport or
Yeah,
drama
I get
or,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody sent me a document and asked me to sign it. Now, one thing that Mensans and other brands of neurodiversity, that's a horrible phrase, of neurodiversity have in common is a little sense of running to the literal. So I printed out a 27-page document, put a wet signature with a fountain pen on the bottom of it, and then rang her and said, "You do realise that I've just printed out, and now I've got to scan in 27 pages for the sake of a signature on the bottom page." And she went, "You are being difficult, you are being obtuse. If you want a wet signature, say a wet signature. If you want an electronic signature, say an electronic signature." Because what she meant was type your name at the bottom, save the document and send it back. And she was treating me like I was broken, other, difficult. And this is not the first time this has happened in my life. I have been bullied out of jobs because people are threatened by my intellect. I just didn't have the understanding of Mensa to fight my corner back then. And I fell apart and I resigned on the spot. I will not work with that person anymore. It's why I am really, really careful that I always work with, not for people now. And when I go, so it's only about 3 years ago, I stopped having a job. I actually still work for Mensa. I administer the tests for Kent. That's the only outside employed job that I do now. And I do like literally one test every 2 months when I was last a school governance clerk, which was the last job I did in addition to running the businesses, you know, that bit when you've got a foot in both camps and it's exhausting and you keep it for safety, but actually life is a lot harder with both jobs. When I applied for the job, I said to them, "Yes, you're paying me. Yes, I'm employed. But in my world, you are my client. I am working with you. I am here to solve your problems. And if that is not something you can deal with, don't employ me." And they offered me the job because actually they needed a lot of things solving at the time. And when I'd solved all their issues and there was nothing challenging for me to do there anymore, I stopped doing the job. I resigned. And, you know, because I was becoming a nuisance to them because I was looking for challenges that weren't there. So, yeah, that's kind of the whole abstractly neurodiverse thing. I have an insatiable curiosity, a very low boredom threshold. Joyce says I can speak for hours without context because I know what I'm talking about. Many, many years ago, I applied for a job with MI6.
Wow.
Yes, I know. Very interesting selection process. I can say this now because it's so many years ago, but as I walked into the MI6 building, somebody I went to university who I did suspect worked in an MI something walked out, and we had to pretend we didn't see each other because that's how it works, that we didn't know each other, couldn't acknowledge each other. So that was weird. But one of the stages is a psychologist assessment. So I should have guessed that I was a bit weirdly wired back then, really. And she said to me, "Have you got a really messy desk by any chance?" And I was like, "Sorry, what?" "Yes, I have actually." And she went,
Organised chaos. It's organised chaos.
"Yeah." And I still do. And I said, "Yeah, how did you know?" And she said, "Because you've got a really, really tidy mind, and people with tidy minds don't need tidy desks." And then she followed it up, which is all very well until you go sick and somebody else has to take over your caseload, which is absolutely true.
Yep.
No, I didn't get the job at MI6, but I did get through 6 of the 9 selection processes. It's utterly bonkers. When you think about what they do, it's probably a good idea that they didn't have me. I like gossip a little bit too much. I think the thing is there are so many people whose wiring is very definitely different. And Joyce will argue with me. I'll tell you what was really, really interesting. It's in the 6 months after I joined Mensa, or as I refer to it, my Mensa diagnosis, 3 people who all work in diagnostics asked me if I have ADHD. And they used odd terminologies like mental ADHD, internal ADHD. Now, these ADHDs do exist, I now know, but they're not phrases I'd ever heard before. Apparently, and I now spend a lot of time, not a lot of time, when I spend time with other Mensans, it's always in an intense setting. So I co-organise Mensa Music Weekend. And I now see it. I now see why people think a lot of people with incredibly high processing speeds, because ultimately, having a high IQ, what that primarily means is you have a really high processing speed. That is the only thing all the different Mensans have in common. There are a few other things, but I don't think that's because of the IQ. constant flitting is very common. The whole insatiable curiosity, low boredom threshold is a big thing. So there's a lady I really, really like who comes to MENSA Music Weekend, not very often, but when she comes every year, she brings a different instrument. But you didn't play that instrument last year. And she was like, well, yeah, I got bored of the whatever, so I took this one up. She's a national level brass instrument teacher, but she'll turn up with a viola or an accordion I've lost count. She's been going to MENSA Music Weekend long before I have. And my co-organizer, Wendy, she said, I have never seen her with the same instrument 2 years running. And it's not about showing off. It's not about musical ability. It's about, I'm interested in this instrument. I'm going to learn it.
Yeah.
And I guess if you're in a position where you can buy £300 or £400 instruments plus every year, you go for your life, love.
Yeah. And got the time to give it your all to learn it. Have you never been interested or intrigued about getting assessed for any sort of neurodivergence?
Sort of. Yeah, I've toyed with it. When 3 people in 6 months asked me whether I had ADHD, I did begin to investigate it, but then other people started poo-pooing it. And it's one of those things where I have to be really careful that I don't undermine my own message, because I am very much of the belief that for those who want to pursue diagnosis, and it doesn't just benefit them, it benefits those around them, and it benefits their kids from the point of view of having a precedent and a trail, and to help them understand themselves. And Joyce and I, both of us, when people say to us, what's the point of diagnosis? We can list dozens of points. Can I apply that to myself? I am a flawed being like all beings. I think I would probably be incredibly borderline if I was diagnosed. The reasons that Joyce has around having that example to the grandchildren and etc. don't apply to me. I don't have my own kids. I don't have young relatives who would look at that. I don't have nieces and nephews. Those for other people reasons don't exist for me. And maybe one day, maybe if it starts getting in the way more than it does. And I also don't believe you should only pursue a diagnosis for negative reasons. I think you should pursue a diagnosis for positive reasons too. There's always that age-old excuse of I don't have time. And you've been through the fight, Lucy. You've got to be a special kind of determined to want to put yourself through that couple of years, haven't you?
Yeah, I kind of feel like my journey feels like it was kind of really roundabout, sort of doing it because it was all about my son to begin with.
Mm.
And before I really knew anything about autism or ADHD, when my eldest was born, I'm 100% convinced he's ADHD, but he's also very academic. He gets on very well at school, and there's been no need for us to pursue an assessment for him, and he's not remotely interested. But when my younger son was born, he was just so different from the beginning. The whole pregnancy and birth and everything was absolutely horrific. If he'd been my first, I wouldn't have had any more children purely based on that. But even from the day he was born, he was just different. And so we wanted to find out how best to support him. And then that journey totally spiraled. But it did still take me a while after even he got diagnosed, when he was 3, for me to then think maybe it applied to me. And actually, my mum had remembered this instance of when I was about 2.5 or 3, when they say there's usually some sort of regression, very stereotypically in autistic children, that my mum took me to the doctors because she said I just suddenly went weird. More so than I apparently normally am. She said I was suddenly lining up all my teddies. I didn't want to be touched. All the very stereotypical things. And she wondered if it was something more going on. And the doctor said, no, she's a girl. It's fine. And then it was never even raised again as a potential question mark until I was in my late 30s. And for me, I've always had that. I felt broken. I felt wrong. I felt out of place. That I could just blend into the wallpaper in any room and just not be there, just inherently broken. So, and there's a phrase, isn't it, about finding out that you're a normal zebra instead of a strange horse.
That is a really cool phrase.
It's something like that. And then I heard another one about different operating systems like iPhones and Androids that do the same. They just get their different layer. I like things like that. And I think that's been such a game changer in the last few years. And my husband and my best friends will say now that I'm so much more comfortable in my own skin now, knowing who I am.
I think being comfortable in your own skin is a really, really good reason. If pursuing diagnosis is going to give you that, I think for me, there were so many different reasons I was different anyway. So I'm a twin, and twins are treated very strangely in the classroom in ways that other them entirely accidentally. So my sister and I, her name is Anne, or Annie she goes by now, were the only children in our class to have our initials sewn on our t-shirts, on all our school clothes, because our teachers couldn't be bothered to learn the difference. Now, I totally get when there's 30 kids in the class, I was absolutely the wilting wallflower. I tried so hard at sports. I love sports. I'm terrible at most of them. I did work as a lifeguard for a while, but that was about strength, not speed. You don't have to be fast to be a lifeguard. You have to be strong. You do have to be reasonable speed, obviously, but strength is more important. We were churchgoers in a fairly non-church going area. I took my music very seriously. I genuinely enjoyed school once I hit secondary. Anne and I were put in separate classes because of the way we were treated from the age of 6, because we were constantly compared, and I always came off worse. My sister is much more naturally outgoing than me. Doesn't mean she's coping any better, just means she's better at blagging it than I am. And I remember I told my mum this story about 10 years ago and she was devastated. So my mum, we'd been to Canada in the summer between what is now year R, so year 1. When we came back, we were about 2 weeks into term, and mum had gone into school and said there were 3 form groups in each year. Please move one girl, say we were in the middle one girl to one class, and one girl to the other class. They need to be separated for their educational needs, but you must do it equally. And that is not what the school did. The school dragged me into the head teacher's office and told me I was moving group. And what's worse, they put me in Mrs. Griffith's class, who was the scariest teacher in the school. Now, in the final analysis, Mrs. Griffiths was a poppet. But I sat in that head teacher's classroom and wept because I thought I was in trouble. I thought, well, if I don't get this right, I'm going to be kicked out of school. When the head teacher asked me why I was crying, of course, because I'm intelligent and I would always overcomplicate things, I said, these are happy tears. I miss Canada. I want to go back to Canada. I'm thinking about my nan. And then little things would happen. So I would go into this classroom and of course you want to make friends because you're in a new class, didn't know anybody. And I would, and I remember, this is going to sound so stupid, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So Mrs. Griffiths was a scary, scary teacher. Okay. We referred to her as the Welsh Dragon because she was a Welsh Dragon. And so I was sitting on a table of 4. I remember this clearly. Hadn't been in the class long, maybe a couple of weeks. And we all hated her. We were all terrified of her. Right, after lunch, we're all going to come in and we're going to growl like bears. We're going to growl, we're going to scare her and we're going to get rid of her. Bearing in mind I'm 6, right? We're going to scare her out of the school, okay? Came back after lunch. Who was the only person who growled? Who was the only person who followed through? Me, right? So, of course, now I'm in primary school equivalent of detention. And she was like, why did you behave like that, Jane? Why? And I said, they all said they were going to do it with me. We're scared of you. I'm blubbing. And we're scared of you. And the idea was to get you to understand how scared we are of you and that we don't want you, you're scaring us. And we wanted to scare you back. And I did it and they didn't back me up. And she clutched me to her bosom and said how much she admired me for having the courage of my convictions.
Yeah, being brave enough to do that is just...
And naive enough to think that anybody else would back me up.
But you were only 6.
Yeah. So I think, in academia, we talk about intersectionality. So where all the differences or the minorities start interlacing and all the sections of who you are start piling up on each other. And I think that's the primary reason why all these intersectionalities of being twins, of being moved, of being a church-going family in a non-church school, of being genuinely wanting to learn when a lot of the other kids were disengaged, of layer up to be all the reasons why school, I loved school, but when you look at my results, school didn't love me. I mean, I've got a PhD now. I've got a first for my dissertation in my bachelor's degree. My GCSE result, I resat my A-levels, or 2 of 3 of my A-levels, and got exactly the same grades again. It's so much of education it's one of the reasons why I'm working on a project to work with universities to provide a different sort of accountability for students. I had a concept design meeting this morning. I have every sympathy with teachers. I've worked as a teacher, or certainly as a tutor. To differentiate for 30-odd kids is a flaming nightmare. But so many kids don't engage because it's not passion-led. If it doesn't matter what subject you're in, If you can say to me, let's practice your apostrophes, but let's write it about whatever it is you're interested in, then kids will perform better. And this is what we see in MENSA. This is what we see with students who have ADHD or who are autistic. You know, if you are, and I have this conversation with the students all the time, there's this danger of becoming a one-trick pony if you only ever write about your passions. But if it means you demonstrate your skills, what the hell?
Yeah. And if it's what you love and you actively enjoy, then you're going to put more into it. So it's going to get better.
And how you're doing what you're doing now, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so, actually. I definitely didn't see my business going the way that it is, or even like having a podcast. And
because I knew you were neurodiverse within 3 seconds of meeting you.
yes, I think that it's a gift you develop, I think, once you are in that world. You can start to pick up on it in other people, definitely.
I think that's why I've become more accepting and more relaxed about saying I'm abstractly neurodiverse.
I think it's such a great phrase.
It's just, why do we need to define? I mean, unless there is it's that non-diagnosis conversation again, isn't it? For me, I don't need to define it any further than this for now. That might change.
And you don't owe anyone an explanation or anything like that anyway.
Besides, I quite like the enigmatic air about it.
I thought you might. I have had people say to me, "Oh, why do you need the label?" I was like, "Well, for me, it's not a label. It's why my brain works differently." And then I know how to work with it, but then also not beat myself up for if I burn out too much or if I struggle with something. I'm a lot kinder to myself now, which has been incredible.
You said something really interesting last time I saw you. Yes.
Okay.
Well, I had noticed how the very, very first time I met you was in a massive room, a very noisy room. Mm-hmm. It was the Synergy Whitstable launch.
Yes, it was. Yes. And yes, because I'd already met Joyce then.
Yes, and you were deeply uncomfortable. And the main reason, you were blagging it beautifully well. But the main way I could tell was how stressed your ears were. You hold your tension back here. I say I am quite acutely observant. So.
Yeah, I'm going to walk around like that now.
Yeah, I learned that from Joyce Grenfell.
Okay.
Yeah, so Joyce Grenfell, who my first PhD is on, and I'm currently finally, after 5 years, turning it into a book. Joyce Grenfell always said she never learned anything at school, because, particularly in French, because she couldn't hear what the teacher was saying because she was so busy watching how the teacher said it. And I do that too. And then the next couple of times I saw you, I know you've been doing a lot of work on presentation and all those things, but I saw you visibly relax. Okay. And I also know from myself and from Joyce, the more you know the script, the easier it is to know what the game is.
Definitely.
But you also said something really important about recovery time. Talk to me more about that, because I think it's something that, especially those of us who have explored this side of ourselves post 25, I'm going to put an age line there because I don't quite know how else to put it, aren't very good at.
Yes.
And don't want to be very good at, some of us.
So I found when I was employed, so like straight after uni until like I had my kids basically, I would find every few months I needed a day or two off work to just crash. I would either have a headache. I'm very prone to migraines. I would either have a headache or I just literally couldn't function. And that reinforced my thinking that I'm broken, that there's something wrong with me, that I'm weak and pathetic. I can't manage as well as everyone else. What's wrong with me? And then, of course, once I started learning more about neurodivergence and burnout and recovery time, it was like a light bulb moment that this makes so much sense. So it's like when I do go to the big networking events, and there's another one coming up in a few weeks, and I'm going to go, and I know it's going to be a lot, but I also know that the next day I'm not doing anything because I need to allow myself that time to decompress afterwards.
And do you have to be strict on yourself to make sure you give yourself that time, or do you see it as an opportunity?
I use it now more as an opportunity so that I will keep the diary free. For example, I won't plan any meetings or anything. So if I need to just stare at a wall, I can do that. But I then have the flexibility that if I feel up to doing a bit of work or whatever it is with the kids or doing some housework or whatever it is, then I can do that. But it's also okay for me to not do anything. And that's been really key, allowing myself that recovery time. And I find that with any sort of networking, even like doing podcasts where I'm very comfortable, I always have guests on that I like and I'm genuinely interested in. But it's focusing a lot on what's going on and if suddenly a neighbour starts mowing the lawn, I'll be like, oh my gosh, I hope that sound's not going to come in. It's not going to be picked up, or things like that. So then afterwards, I'll need to stare at a wall.
It's something that I always think that networking, I sometimes think that people think that being neurodiverse makes you wildly different. I'm not sure that it does. I think mainly what it means is the volume's turned up. For me, and when I watch how Joyce responds to certain things, it's like she's not experiencing anything different from me or from somebody who's pure neurotypical, but it's like the volume is turned up. And for me, another thing that is quite in common with people with high IQ and people on more defined areas of neurodiversity is we have high rejection sensitivities.
Yeah.
And I struggle with that sometimes. If we go to a networking, not so much the network, that's one of the reasons why I do really structured networking, because you can't get ignored.
Yes. And I struggle with that when you're in a room of 100 people
Yes.
and it's just an hour and a half of you just mingling. I can't.
Yes,
I've
yes.
tried doing that, and I did it a lot in the early stages of my business because I was desperate for it to succeed and I wanted to put myself out there.
It's why I won't join the chamber. I applaud what the chamber do, but it's not for me from that point of view.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you. You and I both know the script now. We both vaguely know what ballpark we're in. But when we're done, I shall go and get my axe out and I shall go and chop wood.
That sounds like a great idea. Joyce did tell me that you enjoy doing that.
She's let me have a chainsaw now. Yeah. It's only a little Tonka toy one. It's literally the blade's this long.
That's still okay.
And I spent more money on my Kevlar trousers and my toe protectors and my gloves. It's battery, so it doesn't even make that much noise. I put my earbuds in and listen to my history podcast and vroom, vroom, vroom. Yeah.
I love that.
Nothing like a little bit of violence to deal with a bit of overwhelm.
It helps though. Yeah, it's not not quite as violent as that. But I did come home from something, or it was a meeting, I can't remember what it was. And I came home and I was just like, right, I'm going to make some fudge. And Dave was like, my husband was, I'm sorry, what? And I was like, don't talk to me. I'm just going to be here. And I just made some fudge from scratch, as you do, which I only ever do at Christmas. And it was like Easter, I think.
Yeah. I think people think because I live in front of a computer that this is my happy place. And in terms of research and I think also as soon as you start talking about neurodiversity, people assume that you have an obsession. I have lots of obsessions. But I have lots, and you don't have to have one, you can have lots. And people think that because I'm really, really good at proofreading, that's all I want to do, which it isn't. I am really, really good at it. I also enjoy the ghostwriting. I can't tell you who I've ghostwritten for because that would break contracts.
It's the object, yeah.
That's kind of the point. But I don't want to live in my head 24/7. So yes, we do. We swim twice a week, as much as we can. I chop wood. Joyce anger cleans, stay out of the way. If she goes silent and gets the cloths out, move.
She would be delighted that you shared that.
No, she's perfectly honest about it. I don't know how you and your much beloved are, but Joyce and I spend a lot of time together. We run two businesses together. And I think back in my younger day, when I was working for other people, I used to come home and I'd either go to drama, I used to do lighting and sound, which was equally oddball and nerdy in some respects. Why are they always called Dave, and why do they always have a good idea, and why does the flat always get dropped on my ankle? I think I needed a lot of alone time then, whereas Joyce and I are quite good at giving each other space while being together.
Yes.
And we've never talked about body doubling or parallel play or any of that stuff. But that's sort of, I think do I want to put a stronger label on it as that? Maybe, maybe not. Like we'll often garden, but she'll be in the back garden, I'll be in the front garden.
Not body doubling.
Well, we can hear each other. Well, she'll be at one end of the garden, I'll be at the other end of the garden. But, we're keeping each other company, but we're not getting in each other's space.
Yes. I think my husband and I do that quite naturally it's just what we do without realising. I'll be sat reading a book and he'll be doing something, but we're sat together. But we've got very different interests.
Yeah. I drag Joyce round pen shows, which she loathes, and she drags me round disability conventions, which I won't say I loathe, but all the stalls are exactly the same. And we kind of give each other space for that. And we kind of like support each other with that.
Yes. Yeah, I've been to many a motorbike show with my husband. I've not got the slightest interest in motorbikes. So if someone has been listening to this and they think they desperately need some help with their writing and they don't even know where to start, what sort of advice would you give them?
That's a really groovy question. I think I would say start. Now is the time. We are in an industry, we are currently in a publishing industry which is the most challenging but also the most full of opportunity that's ever been. I would say accept that you cannot edit your own work. I cannot edit my work. As an editor, proofreader, I do not, have done in the past, have regretted it, will never again edit my own work. I can check, I can polish, I can tidy, but ultimately, I have an editor. And for my next PhD, whether she likes it or not, an old friend of mine who sold me her proofreading business is going to get dragged out of retirement. Because I cannot. I just can't. I think don't assume that writing has to be lonely. Again, we live in a very competitive, but also a society that's full of opportunity. If I'm struggling to write, I use FocusMate. Are you aware of FocusMate, Lucy? Okay, so FocusMate is groovy. FocusMate it's like basically body doubling. You go online, you can have up to 3 sessions a week for free, or there's a paid membership where you can do it every day of either 25 minutes or 50 minutes. You have literally a buzzer. You have 90 seconds to basically state what you want to achieve in the time. And then you start working, doing your projects. I've worked with people all over the world. Most of them have been academics, but sometimes people have just been journaling or sorting out their sock drawer or whatever it is they struggle to get done without having something. And then at the end of it, you get another ting and you say, well, did you achieve it? How much did you achieve? Did you know, and you can say whether you only want to focus with other women, other men, what age range. So it's like there's a certain level of matching to it. And you can book it in advance as well, which gives you discipline. I would say there are lots of, in terms of the fiction world and indeed the business book writing world, there are lots of peer-supported writing groups. So you can do writing sprints online. Acknowledge that we cannot be all be good at every single writing skill. I can write anything. Have I got an original idea in my head? No. If you give me the idea, I will write you the story. But conversely, other people have amazing ideas, can't necessarily write or can't write, as I said earlier, dialect. So, there's this concept that writing has to be lonely. It doesn't have to be lonely. It can be a really good way of accessing a community, actually. It can be competitive, but no, I honestly believe that everybody has a book in them. I also honestly believe that if you have done well in an industry, particularly if you're female, particularly if if you're a pioneer, you have a duty to leave a legacy publication. We cannot be what we can't see. Oh, we can, but it's flipping hard. My PhD was on Joyce Grenfell and whether she was a socio-political commentator. Nobody wants to read that. It's academic. It's boring. It's dry. I actually got criticised for being too funny in my PhD.
Wow, I've never heard that with a PhD.
Yeah, I got criticised for being too funny in my PhD. I had to take some stuff out. I also got criticised for being slightly too journalistic. The book that I'm creating out of it is called JG and Me, Business and Life Lessons Joyce Grenfell Taught Me Without Trying. Now, that is not the legacy book that Joyce Grenfell ever believed would be kicking around about her, I can assure you. But if you don't want to write that book yourself, come to me and I will write it for you. We can talk. I have interview skills. We can talk. I can record it all and pay me a bit of money. And 3 months later, I'll give you a book ready to go to a publisher. I've even got a tame editor.
You've got a what?
I've got a tame editor.
A tame editor?
Yeah. So the editor who's editing my book, I know that if I present a book that I have ghostwritten for you, she's at what they call a hybrid publisher. So she doesn't pay you, but it's minimal cost. And it all comes with marketing and support, and she gets the ISBN number for you and all that stuff. But I know that if I present Karen with a book that I have ghostwritten with somebody to leave their legacy book, we'll get it on the shelves. But yeah, no, go and write. Even if you only write a sentence a day to keep your soul clean, then do it.
I love that. So as I draw it all to a close now, I always ask my guests this one question at the end. What advice do you think you would give your younger self about anything? It doesn't necessarily have to be about work.
Stop comparing yourself to other people. Stop comparing yourself to your sister. I heard Dawn French on a podcast say that the best present her 40th birthday gave her was the art of not giving a fuck. And I don't think it was just her who said it. I think Jenny Eclair was in the same episode and fundamentally agreed with her.
Yeah.
I think, learn not to give a fuck as soon as you can.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think
Because we're all actually really skilled at what we do, and we spend so much time worrying about what other people think, whether they think we're skilled. I think it was Stephanie Sword-Williams who said, it's Marmite, isn't it? Actually, you only need 7% of the world to like Marmite to have a really successful brand. You only need to find your Marmite lovers, and you've got a business. You've only got to find your Marmite lovers, and you've got a family. It's not just business; it's about who you surround yourself with.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Jane. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you everyone for watching or listening. Love it if you could like, subscribe, or share the podcast. And if you've got any questions, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. And lastly, just a big thank you again to Purple Frog Signs for sponsoring the podcast. And I will see you all next time.